It was his way of bringing in money. When Sharon came with a twin, they were sold for 10,000 apiece. So this was a big heyday.
At-home DNA tests sold by companies such as Ancestry, MyHeritage, and 23andMe have become an easy gift idea for someone who has everything, and 1 in 20 Brits now have taken one. However, in one case, this seemingly innocuous present actually exposed the truth of how one couple repeatedly had babies illegally to sell them for thousands of dollars. 54-year-old Risa Spear, who was given up for adoption by her parents, used the service and discovered that she had 18 biological siblings, who she previously did not know existed. One of them was Bob Bryntwick, who remained with his birth mother and witnessed her many pregnancies. And Bob joins me now. Bob, welcome to Times Radio.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hugo.
Let's start by, tell me about your childhood. Tell me what you remember about your parents' relationship.
Well, when you talk about my parents, it's my assumed father, Mike, and my mother were occasional lovers, I guess, because he would come every weekend or so and stay the weekend and then be off and then would come back. So I saw him very, very infrequently in my life growing up. I remember him probably when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And I didn't think very much about him. He didn't have much of a relationship with me. He had more with my older brother, who was about 8 years my senior, and my older sister, who was about a year and a half older than me. But the core family of five of us, we stayed our entire lives through this entire episode for the 10 or 11 years that it went on. And it was kind of like a normal routine, basically.
And he had another family with whom he lived nearby.
Yes, yes. I found that out probably when I was about 7 or 8. My older brother told me um, uh, that although he was my father, he had another family, he was married, and he had kids with them as well. I never knew how many until I found out later through 23andMe and Ancestry. And that was kind of the upshot of what was going on in the family.
Sure. And you must remember through your childhood, your mother's repeated, if not near constant pregnancies. Tell us a bit about
Oh,
that.
yes. I would remember her. We always had the births at home. And she was always fairly loud in terms of screaming and all that, giving birth. So it was a constant, oh, here we go again. Because it was every year and a half, it was a constant thing that happened. Probably I remember starting around 2, 3, 4, 5 years old as it kept on going on and on and on. I never asked why. I never wondered. I just knew that these babies would arrive. I never got close to them because I knew they would be gone in about 2 to 3 weeks at most. Some of them were gone within a couple of days.
And this continued until you were about what age?
It came until I was 10. At
Until
10
you were
years
10.
old, at 10 years old, my mother had called Mike up and said to him, she wants to have a meeting. And he had arrived at the house. He never came in. She went to his car downstairs and she told him that the relationship was over. And then the door slammed and she came upstairs, and that was the last I saw of Mike Mitchell.
And from the age of 10 until relatively recently, um, how did you remember this? Did you remember it? What did you think about it? Did you wonder what had happened to these babies? Was it something that ever sort of sprung to mind, or was it just a bit of childhood that you'd put away?
No, I remembered it all. But throughout my childhood, we had moved many, many times because although Mike kept us fed and a roof over our heads, he never paid the rent, and we were very, very poor. So we were moving constantly. We were moving every 3 or 4 or 5 months. And so I knew to give up everything. I gave up my childhood friends when I started going to school. And it was just a thing that happened. It was like, okay, here we go again. I'm moving to another school. My friends are left behind. It was the same thing with my siblings. They were just here and then gone. I had my core group of siblings, the four of them. Well, actually, there was only three of us until Mike came. Michael, the youngest, came on when I was about 8. So, yeah, I was about 8 years old when he came on board, and that was it. It was just a question of, okay, I'm moving on,
Mm.
they're moving on, and it was just that's the way it went. But I remember everything. Yes.
Remind us which city you were living in at this point.
We were in Montreal, Canada at the time, Montreal, Quebec province.
And what prompted you eventually then to look into your own DNA?
Yeah, it's a strange thing because I was approaching 70 years old. By that time, I figured my father had passed away. And I always wondered about him. Because I never had a good feeling about him, I thought that what kind of a person would sell his own children. I wanted to find something nice about him too, because he was my father. So I figured, okay, I've got to find, if he has me, if I'm in him or he's in me, I should say, I've got to find something good about him to say, okay, I can forgive him for some of that stuff. So I submitted my DNA not to talk to my siblings, but to talk to his children because they would be the ones to know him. And I wanted to find out from them what was good about him. And so that was the reason why I submitted my DNA.
But you must have thought at the time, actually, this could also be a bridge to all those babies who went away.
No,
Really, it
I
just didn't
never
occur.
did. It didn't
You-
occur to me that I was going to find these siblings. I maybe it flashed in my mind, but I thought there were no stories about people getting reunited through DNA and stuff, or adoptees going through their process. So I never even considered that. It was just a question of, okay, I got to find this guy's kids and find out a little bit more about him so I can feel a little bit more proudly about my dad.
And look, while this was going on, Risa Spear was on her own mission to examine her own DNA, but from a
Yes.
from a I guess a more a less aware starting point. How did her journey intersect with your journey for the first time?
Um, well, she finally, I think she went onto Ancestry because she had reached a dead end on 23andMe. She had found Rain, but hadn't found anybody else. And it was kind of a puzzle because Rain was 3 years older, I think, than her, and yet had the same biological parents. So that didn't make a lot of sense. And Reese is the kind that likes to investigate. So she went on to 23andMe, which has a separate database. And then she connected with me. And then it was like, oh, here we go. I finally found somebody else. And she found someone in me that actually could tell her what was the true story of how this was all transpiring. So that's how Reese and I had finally met.
But so first you discover this one other sibling. When do you learn about all the others?
Well, what had happened was I found Sharon, who was on Ancestry with me, and then we connected. And she said, "I don't know who my parents are. I have no idea." And so Sharon was the first. She was about a year before Risa, I believe. She connected with me, and she says, "I have a birth certificate here, and it says my mother is Anne Bryntwick." And I said, "Well, that's my mother." I said, "You're my sister." Oh, wow! And she was just looking for her twin. And I had known my mother had twins, so Sharon was the twin, and I never found the other twin. And so I connected with Sharon, and then I said, okay, well, that's kind of strange. She's connecting with me, and that's when I started thinking about other people connecting with me as well. And when Risa came along, then I finally told her, oh, by the way, there's not just me, there's Sharon, and there should be about 4 or 5 others. So hold
Wow.
on to your hats because it's gonna be. And the funny thing about how it worked was everybody came online almost within every 3 or 4 months, and my friends kept asking, "Well, how many have you found so far?" It was like a constant thing. Oh yeah, I found another one, and then yes, another one came on, and and for about a year, all of these 4 others finally all came through with their own reasons to go into DNA. It was really strange.
And in as much as one can understand, like the full story here, what was happening is your mother was having babies with Mike, and Mike
Yes.
was selling them to an adoption agency.
Yes, he couldn't have them on his own. He had his own family. It was his way of bringing in money. When Sharon came with a twin, they were sold for 10,000 apiece. So this was a big heyday. Mike was a fairly successful guy, it seemed, because he wore very fancy clothes. Drove a modern new Cadillac all the time to the house. We were the poorest people on the block, but then this big, huge Cadillac would come into this area, and then that would be my father. It was like, here he comes again. So he was fairly successful, but $20,000 back in those days, I'm talking about in the early 50s, was a lot of money.
Mm.
So he couldn't pass that up. And that was a way of supplementing his income. It didn't supplement us, it just kept us basically fed and housed. But because he never paid the rent, we were evicted on a regular basis to new places. At least he provided the facility to get us from one place to another. A truck would show up. Sometime I would come home and I'd see all of my furniture on the lawn, and I knew, okay, we're about to move to another place, and
I mean,
then that would happen.
through the prism of now, and one would hope as well, the prism of then, he was exploiting your mother terribly. How do
Yeah.
you how do you feel about that now? How did you feel about it before?
I never liked the guy. I had no reason to like him because he had no relationship with me. It was kind of strange. He was supposed to be my father, yet there was no relationship building at all. He'd come and he'd virtually never talk to me, and I thought, even at that young age, I thought this is not right. I didn't know about the payment until I was older, but I did know that this wasn't right. He should have been with us a little bit longer. He should be helping us in some way. He was obviously fairly successful, and yet we were getting nothing. We were celebrating Christmases with no presents under the trees and that kind of stuff, and we would get our food from these, not, I forget what they were called, food bags then, but we get them from these charity facilities that would bring us a turkey for Christmas, and that's how we would have our Christmas dinner.
Does your sort of, your new understanding of what the dynamic was here, does that make you how does that change how you remember your mother? Do you feel incredibly sorry for her? I mean, does it make you think back to did you was she did she seem to have a happy life? Did she seem content
No,
with life?
no, she wasn't really content with life. She was a survivor. She was able to. She always told us, even though we were the poorest family on the block, we had to uh, show that we had pride in ourselves and our family. So she instilled pride in us, even though we had nothing to wear. Sometimes, ratty clothes and all that kind of stuff. So I was proud of her, and I knew she was doing this to keep us together and to keep us fed. So it was her way of surviving. I've never had bad feelings about her. I never pitied her because it was just her circumstances. She was a very proud woman, and she was very capable of looking after her family. So I was proud of her in that way. Yeah.
And the connection of meeting new siblings.
Hmm.
What's that been like? Do you find that you have similarities with each other? Do you find you have an immediate connection, or are they just strangers to whom you happen to share DNA?
Well, it's funny because there does seem to be this funny connection right away. I don't know why, but it just happens. Naomi and I are living close together, so we get together on a regular basis. I have about the same connection, if not a stronger connection, with Naomi that has been new in my life for about 6 years or 5 years. Than with Michael, who has been in my life since his birth.
Mm.
When he was, he's about 8 years younger than me, so we've known each other for a long time. But yet, I have a stronger connection to Naomi. So yeah, it was kind of nice seeing these people coming together, and they shared connections within themselves as well. That was kind of nice to see. When we hug, it's like we really want to be with each other. It was kind of nice to feel that.
And has this process for you, has it been a traumatic process, or has it been a process of kind of resolution?
It's been dramatic. I don't know. It would be traumatic. It's been dramatic. And of course, I found out that Mike wasn't my father. I don't know if you were aware of that, but I finally found out he wasn't my father
Mm.
because when Risa finally connected with me, she said, "I have some bad news for you." And I said, "Oh, what?" And she says, "Well, we don't have the same biological dad." And I felt at that point a really nice sense of relief. Here I was
Right.
trying to find out what was good about this guy, and now he wasn't my guy at all.
So
And
it's
I
just not
felt
your problem. Yeah.
it wasn't my problem anymore; it was their problem now. And because I gave them the story, they had to just assess it and decide on what they felt about him. They did take it one step further because they went to talk to David Mitchell, which was one of the mid range sons of Mike Mitchell, and that was a shared piece of news that didn't go very well over on the Mitchell side because they were unaware. They were totally unaware of us.
Wow.
So he had 16 kids, eight with us and eight with Margaret, and yet they were unaware of each other.
Well, what did you find out about I mean, your actual biological father?
I found I don't want to mention last names because it didn't go over well with my half brothers and sister, but they found out through 23andMe. I found a first cousin when I no with yeah 23andMe. I had registered with 23andMe, and then all of a sudden Janie pops up, and she says, "How could you be my first cousin?" And I said, "Well, this is a story. I don't know how I'm related to you, but." And she says, "Well," and then she talked about the five brothers, and she said, "These were the five brothers, and I can eliminate the one brother." It came down to two brothers, the oldest two, and one of them had supposedly met my mother. My mother was a dancer, loved to go dancing and having parties and stuff, so she liked to have a fairly nice lifestyle. There was a place that you can go in downtown Montreal. We didn't need a lot of money because men were always buying drinks for the ladies and stuff to just dance with them. And she had met my father, and then they had had an affair. I think it was a very brief one, and then I was a result of it. I don't think they. It was probably a one night stand, from what I understand. And at that point, his wife was about 6 months pregnant,
Mm.
and so he probably had reasons to feel a little horny at the time. And my mother was a very vivacious woman, and they
Wow.
connected. Well, they were both Ukrainian. She was Ukrainian Orthodox. He was Ukrainian Jew, and they lived in the Ukraine, both of them, as time went by, and they had moved to Canada and both into Montreal. So they had some commonalities. And my
Mm.
mother had gone out to her birthday celebration in May, and that was one of the reasons. And he was probably celebrating something as well. I'm not sure what, and that's how they
Yeah.
connected. Yeah,
The
but this didn't go well with the family, because I was a reminder of the infidelity of their father,
Of
and they didn't
course.
want to know that. And they loved him, and they thought he was a terrific guy. It doesn't make him a bad guy just because he was had some infidelity, but they didn't want to be reminded. So I am absolutely not connecting with my half
Understood.
brothers and sisters. Yeah.
You seem to have been on a journey that you are glad you went on.
Yes.
That presumably people who use these companies, that isn't the case for everybody. For some, the kind of revelations that come along can be a bit like a bomb going off in their lives. Is there any support, any help they offer you? And do they get in touch at all when revelations like this are going off, or do they not really seem to think it's their problem?
It's totally not their problem. They've never, even on their website, I don't think there's any place to say that if you're having issues, contact our caretakers or whoever that are here. We can connect you to a support group. No, that's never happened. I don't think it happens either on 23andMe or Ancestry.
Mm. Finally, Bob, are there other siblings you're still hoping to meet?
No, there was a small gap of some kind because it had to be a year, year and a half. And I think we have a gap, but I don't know if it ever will be filled. My mother supposedly had 13 kids, including me, and we've pretty much added up to 13. We thought she had 14, but then when I connected with my mother's side of the family, one of my first cousins, he said no, it was her mother had 13, and she had 13. So I was a big mystery to them. I was a big gap in the Chop side of the family
Mm.
because they had never known what happened to Ann Chop, my mother. And then I filled in that gap with them. And they had found me through, I think it was through that article in the Washington Post. And we had connected. And then I finally went to meet them there in Kingston, Ontario, which is close by. And I drove by. We had to get together, and I filled in my part of their tree.
Wow. Bob Bryntwick, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about your fascinating story.
You're very welcome.